So as you all know, we are approaching the 1-year anniversary of President Donald Trump. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this year, with a reality TV show star as the president, was a disaster. Nor do I think it's very controversial to say something like that at this point. And this is because Donald Trump is even beginning to bleed support among his core followers, which I didn't necessarily think would happen this quickly. And large part of the reason why I think this is happening is because clearly he's abandoned the economic populist rhetoric he was using on the campaign trail. Because surprise, surprise, a billionaire doesn't give a shit about the poor. In fact, he literally congratulated all of his rich friends at Mar-a-Lago after they passed the tax reform bill, telling them, you all just got a lot richer. So he is not the man of the people like he championed himself as when he was running for president. And I think his own followers are beginning to wake up and realize that, yeah, Donald Trump is a fraud. He's been a fraud his whole life. He was a fraudulent businessman, and now he's a fraudulent president because he's a shady person. Now, if that wasn't enough, if Donald Trump just basically doing things that help his rich friends wasn't enough, and then rubbing it in our faces, he's already starting off 2018 by threatening to nuke North Korea via Twitter, of course, because how else do you threaten other countries? You do it through Twitter. Saying, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works. And this tweet comes just months after I naively posted a video stating how he seemed to have toned down his bombastic rhetoric towards North Korea, at least while he was on his trip to Asia. So, thanks, Trump. I guess that's what happens when you try to give him a chance on something. You can't give him the benefit of the doubt. So this is what we've been dealing with now for a year. We have an orange man baby as the president of the United States, and he's done a lot of damage to the country. But before I get to the specific policies he's enacted that have been harmful, first, when it comes to the lies he's told, a quantitative analysis by the Washington Post demonstrates that President Trump has made 1,950 false or misleading claims during his first year as president, averaging 5.6 lies per day. And at this rate, he's set to actually surpass 2,000 total lies by the time he officially crosses the 1-year mark. Now, even though we all know Donald Trump is a compulsive liar and he's constantly contradicting himself and fabricating stories, even I'm a little bit surprised by this, because he is lying constantly on a daily basis, and that's not healthy for democracy. So since Donald Trump clearly can't tell the truth, or he's incapable of telling the truth, my question to Donald Trump is very simple.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my god, stop fucking lying.
Now, of course, Donald Trump obviously did more than lie through his teeth during his first year as the president. He also codified policies into law that are incredibly harmful, that are destructive not just to the United States, but the world. So in no particular order, he signed an executive order permitting and expediting the construction of the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. He signed a bill into law that allows internet service providers to sell our online information and data to third parties without our consent. He appointed Ajit Pai to the FCC, who quickly repealed net neutrality. He unilaterally decided to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. He killed DACA. He tried to institute a ban on transgender people serving in the military. He sat idly by as the children's health insurance program expired, and he did nothing. He froze and repealed a lot of Obama-era regulations that protect us from pollution and unsafe food. He passed a tax reform plan that raised taxes on the poor and cut taxes on the rich. He managed to dismantle the Affordable Care Act through an executive order and his tax legislation, which will result in thousands, if not millions of people losing coverage. He signed an arbitrary executive order demanding that 2 regulations be killed every time a new one is passed. He allowed Arctic drilling to continue. He's allowing coal companies to dump debris in streams and rivers again. He moved to sever diplomatic ties Obama was building between the United States and Cuba. He ramped up the United States' illegal drone war with a $400 100% increase in drone strikes in comparison with his predecessor, and in fact, that number is actually higher than 400%. He authorized a military raid on dubious intelligence that led to the death of 30 civilians, including 10 women and children, and this includes Noura al-Awlaki. He illegally and unconstitutionally bombed a Syrian airfield. He directly damaged long-standing relationships with U.S. allies by acting like a baby. This includes him hanging up the phone on Australia's Prime Minister, and he also picked a fight with the mayor of London on Twitter. He praised and befriended Rodrigo Duterte, president of the Philippines, in spite of Duterte's extrajudicial killings of people accused of either dealing or using drugs. He lifted the Carden-Luger rule under Dodd-Frank that curtails corruption of the oil and gas industry. They can now be less transparent. He obviously escalated tensions with North Korea to a terrifying new level. He potentially obstructed justice by firing the FBI director that was investigating him, James Comey. He also refused to condemn the neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville and even defended its participants. He escalated tensions with Russia and notified Vladimir Putin almost immediately after he was elected that the United States would no longer be party to an Obama-era treaty that caps the nuclear stockpiles of both the US and Russia. So effectively, he did something that will facilitate an increase of nuclear weapons that both countries have. He also signed an executive order almost immediately that directed federal agencies to step up deportation of undocumented immigrants. He stacked his cabinet with more billionaires than any other president in U.S. history. He endorsed a pedophile for the U.S. Senate, Roy Moore. Now, he also implemented a Muslim ban, even though he's no longer referring to it as a Muslim ban, since he quickly realized that a Muslim ban itself is unconstitutional. But this ban applies to countries whose citizens did not attack us for the most part. He reinstituted the global gag order on abortion that stops federal dollars from going to international organizations that provide abortions or information about abortions. He increased our already bloated military budget. He expanded and extended the war in Afghanistan. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, thus legitimizing their illegal occupation of Palestine and causing chaos in the region. He approved the massive weapons deal in Saudi Arabia, a regime that's currently committing war crimes and genocide in Yemen. He defended torture on national television, which not only violates the U.S. Constitution, but international law. He signed an executive order that makes Dodd-Frank even more toothless than it already was. He loosened regulations on private equity firms and made it easier for them to scam Americans and essentially screw people out of retirement. He completely ignored Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. And he's currently in violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution because his businesses still pose a conflict of interest. So even though he placed his businesses in a blind trust that's being controlled by his sons, he still has the authority to regain control of his businesses at any point in time, which means that he's still in control. That's a conflict of interest, and that is a violation of the Emoluments Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and he's been in violation of it since he was sworn in. Now, that's not an exhaustive list. That's not every single negative thing that Donald Trump did, and yes, there were some positive things that he did. He did withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, even though later on his trip to Asia, he was lobbying for something that looked just like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He took the worst elements of the TPP and put it into different trade agreements that were bilateral with other Asian countries. Another thing that he did, which can be seen as good, of course, is he didn't repeal the Obama-era regulation that bars discrimination against LGBT people from companies with federal contracts. So I don't even know if he deserves credit for something that he didn't undo. He just didn't touch that. But I mean, if you really want to look for something to give him credit for, I guess that's really the only thing that we can give him credit for. But even though this all sounds terrible, Scott Limoe of the LA Times reminds us that a lot of the damage Donald Trump caused can, in fact, still be undone. And that's true. We can get a new president who will reappoint a new FCC commissioner to overturn that net neutrality decision if courts don't already strike it down. We can get a new president to ensure that the U.S. does, in fact, become a signatory to the Paris Climate Accord again. I'm not telling you about all of the negative things that Donald Trump is doing to demoralize you. I'm trying to encourage you to get involved and resist him, and not resist him in the tepid way that neoliberal Democrats like to resist him. I'm encouraging you to run for office, take to the streets and protest, write letters to members of Congress, email them, tweet at them. I want you to get involved because, yes, we can undo these things, but we can stop Donald Trump from doing even worse things if we constantly keep pressure on him. So, yes, there's a lot of damage. We're going to have to undo all of this. Most of it will be undoable, but some of it won't be. I mean, him appointing Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, that's going to potentially keep the Supreme Court conservative for another generation, which is problematic. We can't undo that unless a conservative steps down while a Democrat is in office, is in the White House. And we don't even know if they'd appoint someone who is a firebrand liberal. They might just appoint someone like Merrick Garland, who's just a generic Democrat who's kind of middle of the road and mostly right wing. So in the end, don't view this as damage he's causing to the country that is irreparable. We still can fight back and we can undo this.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.